but the label itself is essentially FDA's communication to both the manufacturer and the end user, because FDA regulates the label. They indicate to the manufacturer what they have to put on that label. Sometimes FDA will allow them latitude in how they construct their labels. The language. They give the general and sometimes very specific framework for what the label should say and what it should not say. Once the label is done by the manufacturer, FDA will then the product is approved for interstate commerce. And so the product is delivered to the dental office in a container, usually a jar, amalgams we're talking about now. And all of these products are accompanied by a label which is FDA approved, and it says a number of things. It gives indications for use, where you're supposed to use it, information for use, which was part of the discussion in 2010 on amalgam, that part of the label, which deals with some of the concerns about the products, if there are any. They address them in information for use. They sometimes will put language in the information for use section that gives guidance to the practitioner and says, you know, there's a little evidence that this product might do this or that, so caution should be exercised. But it's not legally binding to them necessarily, as other parts of the label might be. They sometimes will put language in the information for use section that gives guidance to the practitioner and says, you know, there's a little evidence that this product might do this or that, so caution should be exercised. But it's not legally binding to them necessarily, as other parts of the label might be. So, for example, under contraindications, if it says do not use in children under 6, it's automatic liability if the practitioner uses the product under that condition. It doesn't matter whether the patient has symptoms or not, or any problems. If it's used in a contraindicated sense, it's automatic victory in a lawsuit for the plaintiff if they bring a lawsuit. So contraindication warnings with amalgam have been very hard to get on the label. I have no idea whether they will put them in that section on the label. I would rather doubt it in over the next few months. But they could reframe the language in other sections that are just as effective at getting the message across without putting the dentist at risk of lawsuit, as they would be if it was under contraindications. Whether you and I agree, I believe there should be contraindications, but the FDA makes that decision. The panel members don't. Toward the end of the second day in 2010, we were asked to discuss a portion of the label under information for use, which actually, to me, was the most important part of the meetings. Because of my experience on panels, I knew when we got to this part, that this was the part that was the most critical. FDA knows it's the most critical part. I happen to think FDA has some interesting ways in which they can modify the language of the label. We talked about the final rule, but it's really the label. That they could change the labeling to reflect the concerns that the panel voiced and still get that 6 and under provision in there, but not in a way that's a contraindication. In other words, they can modify it so that information for use, for example, could make a statement about use in that age group, in which they might say something like, evidence to support the safety in children age 6 and under is scant. We recommend, where possible, alternatives be used. Well, some consumer advocates say, it's not enough, I'm going to sue the FDA. Well, but you see, if that kind of language is put on that label, then persons like myself who might wind up interpreting that to the public or to my profession and saying, don't be mistaken that in information for use, if it's suggesting that you don't do that, my suggestion to you is don't do it. Treat it like a contraindication. See? So it doesn't carry the legal burden that the contraindication carries, but at the same time, if a dentist just ignores it, they may be open to issues.